Christie Fletcher here. Thank you so much for joining me today for another episode of Music Notes. I'm having so much fun learning about the history behind our hymns. Now this hymn today really needs no introduction. As soon as I hear it, you'll know exactly what it is. But what I will tell you is that the inspiration behind the hymn, the person who inspired this hymn, is not the actual author, and we will not find his name anywhere in our hymnal. So let's take a listen. That is Stand Up for Jesus. Now I felt like I needed to stand up while we were listening to that. So the inspiring person behind this hymn, his name is Dudley Tyng, Tyng. He was born in 1825. He's an American, and he lived in Philadelphia. Now, at the time of the inspiration, or shortly before, his father was the lead pastor for the Philadelphia's Episcopal Church of the Epiphany, and Dudley was elected pastor when his father retired in 1854. So everything was going smoothly with the transition from father to son, and like I said, a smooth transition until the day that Dudley began to preach against slavery from the pulpit. Now, unfortunately, the congregation and the elders did not like that, and within 2 years, Dudley had to retire from the church. So he wasn't allowed to preach there anymore. But Dudley was passionate. He had convictions about injustice and was very strong in his faith, and so he continued to preach, and he set out on his own, and he had many followers, and he organized the Church of the Covenant elsewhere in the city, and his reputation continued to grow. So not only was he working on that new church plant, he would also go to the YMCA during his lunchtime along with some of his fellow pastors, and he would preach to the men there at the YMCA. For those of you that don't know, YMCA stands for Young Men's Christian Association, and it was started in London in 1844, and it was in response to the unhealthy working conditions in the big cities there in London and in England due to the end of the Industrial Revolution. The first YMCA is here in America, and it was in Boston, and it was in 1851. Dudley felt a strong pull to preach to young Christian fathers and husbands and to bring them to Christ, and he organized a rally to that effect. And it was in March of 1858 that he preached a rousing sermon to over 5,000 young men at the YMCA. Now, during his sermon, or right before his sermon, he supposedly said, quote, "I would rather that this right arm be amputated at the trunk than I should come short of my duty to you in delivering God's message." So obviously he wanted to do right by God, and he was concerned about that, and he wanted to bring these men to faith. And actually over 1,000 men did convert and made their profession of faith on that day. So Dudley was doing amazing things. Only a short time after that, Dudley was home at his country home, and he left his study to go to the barn to see what was going on. And inside the barn, he reached out to pet a mule And unfortunately, that mule was tethered to a corn shelling machine. And when he reached out, his sleeve got caught in the machine. And his arm was ripped from the socket. The main artery was severed. And 4 days later, his right arm was amputated. When it appeared that Dudley was dying, he called for his father, and he said to his father, and this is where we get our hymn from, he said, "Stand up for Jesus, Father, and tell my brethren of the ministry to stand up for Jesus." Unfortunately, Dudley passed away the following week from his injury. But as I mentioned before, he had a lot of friends and fellow pastors, and one of them was Dr. George Duffield of Philadelphia's Temple Presbyterian Church. And he was deeply moved at Dudley's funeral, and he was inspired, and the following Sunday he gave a sermon that was based on Ephesians 6:14, which says, "Stand firm then, with the belt of truth buckled around your waist, with the breastplate of righteousness in place." Duffield concluded his sermon by reading a poem that he had written as a tribute to his friend Dudley Ting. And this is what he read. stand up for Jesus, ye soldiers of the cross. Lift high his royal banner, it must not suffer loss." So Duffield Sunday School superintendent made copies of that and passed it out to everyone there at the funeral. And pretty soon the lyrics found their way to a Baptist newspaper. And after that, the hymn spread from there, the poem, the lyrics. So now that you know the story behind Stand Up for Jesus, when you sing verse 3, you'll recall the story as the lines are, stand up for Jesus, stand in his strength alone. The arm of flesh will fail you. Ye dare not trust your own. Put on the gospel armor, each piece put on with prayer. Where duty calls or danger, be never wanting there. So we have stand up for Jesus. You can find it on page 660 of our hymnal. And when you look at the bottom of the page, you will see the text is George Duffield Jr. So that was the friend of Dudley Ting, and he wrote stand up for Jesus in tribute to his friend who was a passionate preacher for young men, husbands, fathers, and a preacher against slavery at the time. Now, when we're also looking at the bottom of the page, you see it says tune, and we've got George J. Webb. And then if you look over to the right, you see Webb, W-E-B-B. That is the hymn tune that was set for Stand Up for Jesus. And that is the most common one used. Now, George Webb was born in England in 1803. And his parents intended for him to become a minister. But it was obvious at a young age that George was just really gifted in music. And so he ended up having a career in music. First, he studied organ at the Salisbury Cathedral. And then he became an organist in the church at Falmouth. And by 1830, he immigrated to the United States. And he settled in Boston, and he became an organist in the Old South Church. So he composed Webb, this hymn tune, which is also referred to as Morning Light, on his voyage from England to the United States. The hymn tune itself was originally published in a secular music collection called the Odeon. And that was music compiled by Webb and also Lowell Mason. So does that name ring a bell, Lowell Mason? He was the American who wrote the hymn tune Hamburg. And Hamburg, we learned, is what we sing to when I survey the wondrous cross. So that's on page 425 of our hymnal, and Lowell Mason wrote that tune. So Webb and Mason are composers, and they meet one another in Boston, and they become friends. And I just think it's so neat. We're gonna come upon Lowell Mason's name again and again. Mason was an important figure in Boston on the musical scene, and so he was able to introduce Webb to all of his people in the music scene. They both served at different times as president of the Handel and Haydn Society. They taught music in public schools, and Webb also was a co-founder with Mason of the Boston Academy of Music. And so they collaborated on a number of projects together. While Mason was a friend of Webb's, he did not put the words "Stand Up for Jesus" to Webb's hymn tune. It was another friend of theirs. His name was William Bradbury. Now, we haven't studied him yet, but we will. I hesitate to give it away, but I just can't help it. So William Bradbury, we're going to soon find out, wrote the tune for "Jesus Loves Me." So we'll get to that in another episode. But it was Bradbury that paired George Webb's tune, Webb or Morning Light, with the lyrics from George Duffield, Stand Up for Jesus. And that's how we ended up with this amazing, like I said, very passionate call to arms, call to defend Jesus, to proclaim just the wonder of what Jesus has done for us. So, a hymnologist, Stanley Osborne, says that this hymn tune goes with a roar. It is, and just a little tiny bit of music, it's not theory, but just the organization of the hymn tune. If you sing it next time, I want you to think about kind of how simple it is. The first line we sing is almost exactly the same melody as the second line, so we refer to that as A, A. Now the third line is different, and then the fourth line is the same as the first and second. So that's A, A, B, A, rounded bar form. So we've got da 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 da, and here it's the same with just a minor change at the end. Lift high his royal banner, it must not suffer loss. Now this one is different. From victory unto victory, his army he shall lead. That's the B. Then we go back to the original melody. Till every foe is vanquished, and Christ is Lord indeed. So it's very simple to sing. A, A, B, A. Also, like I said, the melody is simple. The harmonies are easy. It's a great song for the choir to sing in 4-part harmony. It's very intuitive. And then the final thing I will say is Osborne says you must sing this entire hymn in parts and, of course, standing up. So, shall we sing Stand Up for Jesus?